Well, good afternoon. I finished from this school about 20 years ago. It feels great to be back on campus. A lot has changed. I saw a couple of you walking around listening to your music on MP3 players. And back then, we used to listen to music recorded on things called cassettes and used to play them on devices called Walkmans. So here's a challenge to the audience. If any of you can find either a cassette or a Walkman by the end of the evening, come see me and I'll give you a prize of immeasurable value. The point here is just to demonstrate how things change. When I was here 20 years ago, I didn't go to class very much. All my time was spent in listening to music on this Walkman. Now there's this one song that I would play in a loop. I mean, you couldn't really play anything in a loop back then, but we would live by that song. And there was a line in that song that talks about making something out of nothing at all. That line has stayed with me after all these years, and since I'm back on campus, I thought I should use that song to take you on a journey for the evening. So that's my plan. We're going to go on a journey, and we're going to take you through a few stories, okay? So I live and work in Silicon Valley. Many of you probably have heard of these now famous corporations that started out in a garage in Silicon Valley. Now what these stories, what they don't tell you is, given a choice between a nice corner office, air conditioning, beautiful ergonomic furniture, and a garage, most of these founder CEOs would choose the nicer office. Nobody really wants a garage to start their first business. Except, of course, they didn't really have the choice. The garage was the only available option to them. Now, the garage did not have everything they wanted. That was enough for them to start with. And as in the garage story, pretty much everything we do is about constraints. You never really have everything at your disposal to solve the problem you're trying to solve. So the garage really is a metaphor for life. You're given a set of cards and you have to figure out where in the garage have you placed that set of pliers or that screwdriver that will help you unlock the next problem you face. So, as I said, let's go on this journey. The journey starts roughly 30 years ago in a place called Belur, not far from here. There was this young man. He was a factory worker. He was good at making beds. You know the kind of beds I'm sure you still have in your hostels, kind of this steel, not particularly straight, is not very good for sleep. He used to make those in a factory near Belur. And he would make a lot of beds. That's what factories do. He was a good guy, and as he was probably 25 years old back then, he really wanted to start something. Now, unfortunately, what happens is, in a couple of years, that factory shuts down. The owners of the factory, they shut shop and they leave. Now this man, this good man who wanted to do something, is suddenly unemployed. So when you don't really have much, you basically have nothing, what do you do? Well, many of us would probably withdraw into our lives and sulk, not him. So what he does is he realizes he has skills. He can make beds. Some of those beds could be used to treat patients. He has this empty building that was the factory. And he decides to start a very rudimentary, a very basic patient service department. It was outpatient only, and he would treat people who had nowhere else to go. So he gets to work. He has colleagues from the same factory who used to work with him, and they're also unemployed. So they get together and they make these beds and they start a hospital. All of you are probably familiar with the healthcare crisis in this country. There's never really enough hospitals. There's just so much to be done. Now, people around him, people around Belur, realize what's happening in their community and they step up. Soon, he finds doctors who come from the community and help out in the evenings. A few days later, he finds some retired nurses who are inspired by what's going on, and they join him and they create the hospital. This hospital starts to serve the people in the area. Now, given the scale of healthcare and the crisis and the lack of hospitals and infrastructure and all of that stuff, this suddenly becomes very popular. People start showing up. A large number of people start showing up at this hospital. So where do you go from here? You can turn them away, or you can take another leap of faith. So our young man starts another hospital and then another one, at the end of which he has 3 hospitals where you can just walk in and you'll get treated if they have the doctor, if they have the nurse, and that's how. This was his garage. He had the tools. This was a factory worker. This is not somebody with a medical degree, had no background in nursing, had no background in patient care, but he starts 3 hospitals. These hospitals run in Belur, there's one in Bolpur, and there's one in Shirampur right now. This is the young man. This picture was taken roughly 2 years ago. His name is Phoni Gopal Bhattacharya. You can call him Bhattchasda. And if you have the time, go over to Belur, walk into that hospital and say hello to him. He will sit down with you over a lunch of dal and bhat, and he will tell you how much fun it was. I told you about nurses, right? So these guys, they don't really have a lot of money, but treating patients requires skills. It requires specialized medical skills. So what do? They find these destitute children from all over the state of Bengal, children who have nowhere else to go. They're mostly orphans. They take them into this facility. This is the top floor of a building which houses a hostel. There's a mess, so everybody gets fed. And in the evenings, these kids are given the basic training that allows them to go and work in these hospitals. They are training the next generation of nurses on that table, in that school. This is that hospital. So if you go, and I'll tell you where this is, and they would love to hear from you. So this is what making change is all about. You can sit on your hands, and the problems are overwhelming, but you got to look into the garage and find that set of tools. And I know you all have that. Changing gears a little bit, I am trained to be a product manager. I am in the business of electronic money. Now, product managers create products. In order for me to create electronic money products, I need people with bank accounts. Now, of the 7 or 6, what's the population of the world now? 6.5, 7 billion? 7, right? So, in the rich world, 90+% of all people have bank accounts. In our country, it's roughly 1 in 5. So, as a product manager, as I'm trying to build electronic payment products, and I believe creating displacing cash is good for all. Where do I even start? If most of the people don't have bank accounts, how can I digitize their money? How can I create an electronic payment product? Well, first we get to why don't they have these accounts? Well, some of them just don't have money. For some, the bank is just too far away. Who wants to walk 100 kilometers to go to a bank branch? For some, the bank is not interested in them. If you're making 500 rupees a month, it's not really the business case of having an account at that bank doesn't exist. And finally, a lot of times the banks require establishment of identity, paperwork, documentation. For us in this room, this sounds pretty basic, but this could be a barrier for many, many people in our country. So back to the product manager, and this is not something, by no means this is something I created, but this is something people around the world realized very quickly as they went about the quest of digitizing money. What they found is there are more mobile phones in the world than bank accounts. Heck, there are even more toothbrushes in the world than bank accounts. There are really 2 billion bank accounts, there are 4 billion toothbrushes and 7 billion mobile phones. So your constraints of creating a product are different, right? So what do? So the answer is, and this is true, the example on the right is from Africa, where a product manager somewhere in the middle of Africa, I think it was Kenya, they figured out that what if we could take the mobile phone number and treat it as a bank account? What if mobile minutes became your wallet of value, and you use that to transact and use that as money? You wouldn't think of the Indian post office as the cradle of innovation. But what the Indian post office has in India, that many banks don't is they have presence. Every village has a post office. Everybody gets mail. The postman comes over and delivers, hand delivers to every Indian citizen. So what if that postman became a portable bank account? These are things that have happened organically. These are examples where people have made products of nothing at all. Next example. This is again from the business world, and as technologists, you probably appreciate this quite a bit. There's a lot of talk of data and machine learning and IoT and fog computing in the news today. No CTO's speech would be considered serious if it didn't have these keywords. But the constraints in data have evolved over time. So in the beginning, and this is probably 10, 20 years ago, there was a problem of storage. When you have so much data that is being generated from your life, where is the database? We didn't have the database to store all that data, right? It was just too expensive. It was either in the labs. I mean, the average person couldn't really figure out a way of running a data model, a math model on your PC in your rooms, right? Then we solved for it. Computing became ubiquitous. There is more processing power now in your phones than what used to be on the mainframes 10, 15 years ago. So this was solved. So first, database, not enough. We fixed that. Second, processing power, CPU cycles. So we solved that. Then came the problem of the minds, right? Because the computer is just a dumb machine. You need people to operate it. But ultimately, the people running the world are not all data scientists. Fundamentally, it comes down to you crunch the data and you find out a way to tell the story that's hidden in the data to somebody who's going to make a decision. It's also possible that somebody is looking at that decision on a screen that is roughly 9 inches. So what do you do about that? This is where, along the themes of Crossroads, this is where art and science come together, right? The data scientists have to work with the designers and figure out how to bring out the stories that are hidden in the data. So let me take an example. In the commercial aviation business, there are some big numbers, right? Number of airports, 43,000 roughly. Number of flights annually, that's a pretty big number. Number of people traveling on commercial aviation. Number of flights being taken, that's a pretty big number too. Now, it's hard to make sense of these numbers. How do you really understand how big or small this is? That's where the data scientists get together with the designers and the visualizers, and you present something like this. This is way more compelling. This is what it takes to tell the story that's hidden in the data that you're crunching. It's never enough to be able to know the science, ultimately to make progress. You need to know the perfect amalgamation of science and art, and that's how you tell your story. So it's ultimately about making sense from nothing at all. So in the winter of 2013, me and 9 of my other friends, all from roughly in the 90s batch late 90s batch of this college, we were in Kolkata. This was December, and we were visiting the school. Now, if you see in the frame, there's a little bus. There's a picture of a bus there. Can you tell me what's the number on that bus? 55. This bus route has been there since this college was started. Well, I guess in the 1800s there was no automation, but this bus has been around for a very long time, decades. In fact, my first trip to BE College, then BE College, now IIEST, was on this bus. I arrived at Howrah, I get my trunk on the bus, and off you go, and you arrive at first gate, and then the story begins. This bus, by the way, runs from Esplanade through Howrah Station to Howrah Bridge to Foreshore Road, GT Road, and goes up to be a botanical garden. So 10 of us crazies decided we're going to run this road. This is exactly 10 kilometers, by the way. And we were by no means fit enough to run it. But we said, let's try it, right? We made sure we had an ambulance with us because who knows something went wrong. But we did complete it. We ended up in the college. We had a very large breakfast. And we did a few other things which shall go unnamed for tonight. And then we went home. The next day, this thing comes up on the paper. Somebody picked up the story of 10 students or ex-students who decide to run this road, which is considered a Calcutta heritage road. So you run through Eden Gardens and Red Road and all that. So this news comes out, and that gets me thinking, well, this was all for us. What are we doing to give back to the community? Maybe is there a way to connect this bus that runs through the community of Howrah to the community and do something for the community? Well, next year, we decide to tie up with Shromojibi Hospital. Remember our first story? And we decide this bus route is 55, so everybody who runs has to pay $55, roughly translates to 3,500 rupees, to this hospital. And this is all being done on a whim on social media. There's really nobody here. We design custom t-shirts and we go live. Next year, so 2013, there were 10 people. Next year, 150 people show up. They're all paying this 3,500 rupees. All of that money is going to the hospital, right? In the scheme of things, that's not a lot of money. But if you go to Shromojibi and you see how they're treating the completely underprivileged, you'll realize that money goes a long way for those guys. We created a brand. If you look closely, you will see that the road that the bus takes is stylized using that kind of blue ribbon. There is BE College, IIEST. We were trying to figure out what is the right brand to use. There's Belur Shromojibi Hospital, and we created this brand called 55, which is roughly inspired by a more famous route in the United States called Route 66. So we've been doing that for 5 years now. Last year, we raised about 7 lakhs. We had about 40 different international cities represented in those runs. So I have people coming in from all over the world. And this is not a big run. There are more unique events. There are longer runs in Kolkata. But this is very special. So the kid you see in the last shot running into the finish line is from that nursing school. So look, this is not a lot, but it's more than what I was doing 5 years ago, right? Making a difference is not that hard. It might look overwhelming, but you got to get off your backside and just go for it. You have all the tools. So in closing, let me tell you a deeply personal story. My late father walked across the border from Bangladesh to India in 1947. The country was getting broken up. He was 12 years old. He had just lost his parents, so he was an orphan. And he had absolutely nothing. And he was going into a completely foreign country in the middle of chaos. He was not alone. There were millions of his generation who took that journey. Now the good thing, the positive thing in all of this is mostly they figured it out. The fact that I'm here standing and speaking with you is because they did. So did Mr. Phoni Gopal Bhattacharya or Bhattacharya, who, when he was unemployed, didn't sit at home, but went out and figured it out. And he figured it out of mostly nothing. And that is the crux of the matter. Look, the fact that you're here today, in this place, in this time, with friends around you, with access and knowledge and teachers and all this interdisciplinary and heritage in this institution make you really unique. Never forget that. They say that the future is uncertain. What that basically means is there will be good days and bad days. And on those bad days, you gotta look deep inside and remember that nothing is really impossible because it's right there within you. Well, that's all I had to say. Good luck and safe travels.